Veteran lost his $4.2 million home and kids, but a secret in his mom's basement changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. When life crashes down, it can feel as though there's no hope left. But sometimes, the key to everything lies hidden in the most unexpected places. Mark Harrison had it all. A beautiful home worth $4.2 million, a wife, and 2 kids. A career in the military had given him everything he needed. But then came the storm that changed it all. It wasn't a natural disaster, but a series of unfortunate events, mounting debt, a divorce, and a bitter custody battle that stripped him of everything he held dear. The once grand home, the heart of his family's memories, was lost to the bank. He was left with nothing but a few belongings and the crushing weight of a broken heart. Mark found himself living in a small, run-down apartment, alone and unsure of his future. The only companion he had left was his loyal dog, Max, who never left his side. Every day felt like a struggle, and Mark began to question if things would ever turn around. But fate had other plans. One rainy afternoon, feeling defeated, Mark decided to return to his childhood home. His mother had passed away several years ago, and the house had been left untouched since then. It was a relic of the past, filled with memories he had tried to bury. As he walked through the creaky old door, a sense of nostalgia washed over him. The place was just as he remembered, dusty, quiet, and filled with the scent of old wood and faded wallpaper. But there was something different about it now, a sense of urgency in the air, as if the house was waiting for him to find something. As Mark wandered through the rooms, memories flooded back. He could almost hear the laughter of his children running through the halls, the sound of his wife's voice calling him from the kitchen. But the past couldn't be revived, and the weight of his losses was too much to bear. He made his way to the basement, a place he had spent hours playing as a child. It was cluttered with old boxes, forgotten treasures, and things his mother had left behind. Among the dust and cobwebs, something caught his eye, a small, weathered box tucked away in the corner. Curiosity piqued. Mark picked it up, his hands trembling as he opened it. Inside was a letter, a key, and a small map. The letter was written in his mother's handwriting, and the words inside revealed something that would change his life forever. She had left him a secret, something hidden in the very home he had lost. Mark's heart raced as he read the letter. What could it be? What was hidden beneath this old house? The answer was just beginning to unfold, and with it, a chance to reclaim everything he thought was gone. The mystery had just begun. Mark sat in the dimly lit basement, the dust swirling around him as the weight of the letter in his hands grew heavier. His heart raced, his mind swirling with questions. What was this? What was his mother hiding? He had not expected to find anything like this, especially not in the house he had once called home. He unfolded the letter again, reading it slowly, trying to absorb every word. His mother had written it years ago, long before her passing. She had left him a secret, something hidden in the house, something that could change everything. The letter was simple, but it was enough to send his mind into overdrive. She spoke of a treasure, but not the kind of treasure most people thought of. This was something far more valuable. A treasure of the past, something that had been left behind for a reason. She had hidden it in the house, in a place that only Mark could find. A key, she wrote, to something far bigger than the life he had left behind. And now it was his. The key was in his hand. The map was his guide. But where would it lead him? Mark stared at the old, crinkled map, tracing the faded lines with his fingers. It pointed to a specific spot beneath the house, deep underground. A hidden room, perhaps, or a vault. His mind raced with possibilities. What could be down there? Was it something his mother had known about for years? Or was it something even older, something that had been hidden for generations? Whatever it was, Mark knew one thing for certain. This was his chance to get everything back. He stood up, brushing the dust off his clothes. Max, his loyal dog, trotted up beside him, sensing the change in Mark's demeanor. Mark smiled faintly at the dog, his partner in this strange journey. Together, they had lost everything, and together, they might just find it all again. He left the basement and made his way upstairs, the letter and the map still clutched tightly in his hand. The house creaked under his weight as he walked through the rooms, each step echoing in the silence. It was as if the house itself was waiting for him to unlock its secrets. Mark paused in the living room, staring out the window at the overgrown yard. The house, once a symbol of his success, now felt like a prison. It had been taken from him, along with his family, his dreams, his future. But that was about to change. He wasn't going to let the past define him. Not anymore. He glanced back at Max, who was staring up at him with those knowing eyes. Together, they would uncover the mystery of the house. Together, they would find the treasure that had been hidden for so long. Mark took a deep breath and walked toward the basement door. It was time to see what the key unlocked. The air in the basement was colder now, and the walls seemed to close in around him as he made his way to the spot marked on the map. He knelt down, brushing aside the dust and dirt from the floor. There, hidden beneath layers of old carpet and debris, was the faint outline of a trapdoor. His heart skipped a beat. This was it. He ran his fingers along the edges, feeling the cold metal beneath his touch. The key in his hand seemed to hum with anticipation. He inserted it into the lock, and with a small click, the door creaked open. Mark's breath caught in his throat as the door swung wide, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into the unknown. Max growled softly, his body tense, but Mark reassured him with a gentle hand. "We're going down there," he whispered. The stairs creaked under their weight as they descended deeper into the earth. The air grew cooler, the silence almost deafening. At the bottom of the stairs, Mark found himself in a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with old books, photographs, and trinkets. But it was the desk in the corner that caught his attention. A large, wooden desk covered in dust. Mark approached it slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. As he brushed the dust away, he noticed something strange, a drawer that was slightly ajar. He pulled it open, revealing a stack of papers, old and yellowed with age. The top paper caught his eye. It was a deed, but not just any deed. This one had a name on it, his mother's name. And beneath it, written in bold letters, were the words, "Ownership of Larkstone Hill." Mark's mind reeled. Larkstone Hill? He had never heard of it before. But something told him this was the key to everything. He grabbed the papers, his fingers trembling. This was it, the treasure his mother had left for him. It wasn't gold or jewels. It was land. Land that could change his life forever. Mark stood up, clutching the papers tightly in his hands. He had found it. The mystery was unfolding, and he was ready to follow it to the end. Mark held the papers tightly in his hands, the words on the deed to Larkstone Hill flashing in his mind. Ownership of Larkstone Hill. It was so simple, so direct, and yet he could feel the weight of its significance. He had no idea what Larkstone Hill was, but he knew this was his path forward. His mother had left him something far more valuable than he could have ever imagined. The mystery had just deepened, and Mark was determined to uncover its truth. Max, ever loyal, stood by his side, sensing his owner's resolve. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a piece of land. It was a second chance, a lifeline in the middle of a storm. He needed to see it for himself. There was no turning back now. He left the basement and climbed the stairs to the main floor, his mind racing. He knew there was more to this than a simple plot of land. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. Mark grabbed his keys and a jacket, preparing for whatever lay ahead. Max trotted ahead, his paws clicking on the wooden floor, as if leading the way. Outside, the cold night air hit Mark's face, sharp and invigorating. He took a deep breath, the promise of a new beginning hanging in the air. The road to Larkstone Hill was unknown, but Mark felt an undeniable pull. It was as if the house itself had whispered the secret to him, as if everything that had happened led to this moment. He drove for hours, the roads dark and empty, the headlights illuminating the thick fog that clung to the ground. The map his mother had left him guided him, each curve and turn etched into his mind. The closer he got, the more the weight of the discovery settled on his chest. Larkstone Hill wasn't just a name. It was a place, a real place, and it was his. The fog thickened, and Mark's anxiety grew. What would he find when he got there? Was it a mistake to follow this path? What if there was nothing there? What if it was all just a cruel joke? Max whined from the passenger seat, sensing his owner's tension. Mark glanced over at the dog, giving him a reassuring smile, though his own doubts gnawed at him. He pressed on. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the road curved, and Mark saw it. The hill. The name had always felt like something distant, something intangible, but now it was real. The dark silhouette of Larkstone Hill rose before him, bathed in the eerie glow of the headlights. The hill was covered in thick trees, and in the distance, Mark could make out the shape of a house. It was old, abandoned, but something about it felt alive, as if it had been waiting for him. He parked the car and stepped out into the cool night. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence almost deafening. Max stood by his side, ears alert, his body tense. Mark could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. What was waiting for him at the top of the hill? He walked forward, his boots crunching on the gravel as he made his way toward the house. The closer he got, the more the place seemed to pull him in. The house was small, worn down, but it had character. The kind of character that could only come from years of history. Mark stopped in front of the house and looked around. It was quiet. Too quiet. But there was something familiar about it. Something that made him feel like he had been here before. As if the house had been a part of him all along. He stepped up onto the porch, his hand resting on the old wooden railing. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a dark, empty interior. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The air inside was thick with dust, the remnants of a life that had long since passed. But in the stillness, Mark could sense something. A presence, a weight, a connection. He stepped further into the house, the floorboards creaking beneath him. Every step felt like a journey back in time. Max trotted ahead, sniffing the air. Mark followed him, his heart pounding in his chest. The house was small, but it felt like it had a story to tell. Every corner, every room, seemed to hold a secret. Mark's eyes wandered, taking in the faded wallpaper, the cracked window panes, the furniture covered in sheets. This was no ordinary house. This was his house. His family's house. He could feel it in his bones. As he made his way through the rooms, Mark came to a stop in front of a door at the back of the house. The door was old, the wood weathered, but it felt significant. He reached out, his hand shaking as he touched the knob. With a deep breath, he turned it and stepped inside. The room was dark, but there was something about it that called to him. Mark stepped forward, his eyes adjusting to the low light. He could see the outline of a chest in the corner of the room. His heart raced as he approached it. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He knelt down, his hands trembling as he opened the chest. Inside, there were piles of old documents, photographs, and other personal belongings. But beneath them, something caught his eye. A small, dusty box. Mark picked it up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the key to the mystery, the final piece of the puzzle. He opened the box, his hands shaking as he lifted the lid. Inside was a set of old keys, and beneath them, a faded letter. Mark took the letter, his breath catching as he read the words. The key to everything lies within. His pulse quickened. This was the moment. The mystery was about to unfold, and Mark knew that whatever lay ahead would change his life forever. Mark held the small box in his hands, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, nestled among the old papers and photographs, were the keys, real, solid keys. He ran his fingers over them, wondering what they might unlock. The faded letter he had found beneath them read, "The key to everything lies within." The words echoed in his mind. What could they possibly mean? Mark stood up, the chest still open in front of him, but the mystery of the keys was now at the forefront of his mind. Max, sensing his unease, padded over and sat next to him, looking up with calm, amber eyes. Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady his thoughts. He couldn't let the uncertainty control him. Whatever was hidden here, whatever his mother had left him, it was his now to uncover. He had to know the truth. Without hesitation, Mark grabbed the keys and stood. Max followed at his heels as they made their way through the house. The silence was overwhelming, the only sound their footsteps on the wooden floors. Mark moved toward the back of the house, where the map and the letter had led him. He had to check every door, every room. There was a feeling in the air, a tension that made the walls seem to close in on him. He could feel it deep in his gut. The house was hiding something, and it wasn't going to let him go until he found it. He tried each key in the old doors, one by one, but none of them fit. His frustration grew. It had to be here, somewhere, hidden in plain sight. Max nudged him, as if encouraging him to keep going. Then, as Mark passed one of the old cabinets in the hallway, he paused. Something about it felt different. He knelt down, noticing the brass handle had a slight shimmer to it. The key that had felt so insignificant earlier now seemed to glow with importance. He slid it into the lock, holding his breath. With a soft click, the door opened. Inside, the room was small, nothing more than a closet at first glance. But as Mark stepped inside, he realized it was far more than that. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with old tools, jars of preserved fruit, and faded books. In the center of the room, there was a large chest, similar to the one he had found earlier. Mark's pulse quickened. He approached the chest cautiously, wondering if this was it, the final piece of the puzzle. He knelt down and examined the lock. This one was different, older. He inserted the key and turned it, the lock giving way with a satisfying click. As the lid creaked open, Mark's breath caught in his throat. Inside, instead of more dusty relics, there was something far more valuable. A stack of old deeds, titles, and legal documents. The top one caught his eye immediately. It was the deed to Larkstone Hill, the same place his mother had written about. His hands shook as he picked it up. This wasn't just land. It was land with a history, with stories, and, as Mark could now see, a value that went far beyond what he had ever imagined. As he flipped through the documents, Mark saw names and dates, accounts of transactions, and the names of people who had once owned the land. But it was the last document that truly grabbed his attention. The title at the top read, Larkstone Hill Inheritance. His mother had written about it, but this was more than that. This was a legal document, and it named Mark as the sole heir to everything related to the land. It was all his now. As he held the papers, a flood of emotions hit him. Anger, confusion, relief. His mind raced as he tried to understand the implications. What did this mean? How could his mother have kept such an important secret from him? And why had she left this legacy, this inheritance, to him? Mark sat on the floor of the small closet, surrounded by the weight of his discovery. Max sat beside him, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. Mark looked down at the documents, the words starting to make sense. The land wasn't just a place. It was a legacy, a place filled with history. And now it was his. He couldn't help but wonder what his mother had known. She had left him this treasure, hidden away, waiting for him to find it. The truth was out there, buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten history. But Mark knew one thing for sure. His life was about to change. As he stood up and gathered the documents in his hands, Mark realized that this discovery wasn't just about reclaiming what he had lost. It was about reclaiming himself, his future, and a legacy that had been waiting for him to uncover it. He turned and made his way back to the car, Max following closely behind. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Mark felt like he had a purpose again. The past had not defined him, and now, with Larkstone Hill in his hands, he could finally move forward. Mark couldn't help but feel the weight of the papers in his hands as he sat in the car, staring at Larkstone Hill looming before him. The documents had revealed so much about his inheritance, but there was still so much left to uncover. His heart raced as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes flickering over the names and dates in the papers. This was it. This was his chance to finally rebuild his life. He glanced at Max, who sat by his side, his amber eyes calm but alert. The dog had been through everything with him. And now, they were standing at the threshold of a new chapter. Mark started the car, pulling away from the house and heading toward the hill. As he drove, the road wound through dense forest, the towering trees seemingly watching over him as if guiding him forward. Mark didn't know what to expect at the top of the hill, but he knew he couldn't go back. Not now. The further he drove, the more he felt the weight of his decision. He was about to claim something that had been buried for generations. But was it a blessing or a curse? His mother had hidden this treasure for a reason, but the reason was still a mystery. Why had she chosen him to inherit this land? What was it about Larkstone Hill that made it so special? The questions gnawed at him, but he pushed them aside for the moment. As he reached the foot of the hill, he slowed the car, taking in the view. The land stretched out before him, rolling hills covered in a thick blanket of trees and brush. In the distance, he could see a small cottage nestled at the base of the hill. It looked abandoned, much like the rest of the property. Mark pulled up to the cottage, parking near the weathered front door. The house had clearly been neglected for years, the roof sagging, the windows boarded up. Yet, there was something about it that called to him. He stepped out of the car and took a deep breath, the cool mountain air filling his lungs. He could hear the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint chirp of birds in the distance. It was peaceful, serene. But that serenity didn't last long. Max's ears pricked up, and he let out a low growl, his body tense. Mark looked around, his senses heightened. He had been in the military long enough to know when something wasn't right. He scanned the area, his eyes narrowing as he searched for any signs of movement. But there was nothing, just the quiet, empty house before him. Mark took a step forward, the gravel crunching under his boots. As he approached the front door, Max's growl grew louder, and Mark's instincts flared. Something was off. He reached for the door handle, turning it slowly. The door creaked as it opened, revealing a dimly lit interior. Dust filled the air, and the smell of old wood and mildew hit him immediately. He stepped inside, Max following closely behind. The floorboards groaned under his weight as he moved deeper into the house. The walls were lined with faded wallpaper, peeling in places. Furniture sat covered in sheets, untouched for what seemed like years. Mark's eyes scanned the room, his heart racing. What was it about this house that had drawn him here? He felt a strange connection to it, as if it was calling him. He walked through the rooms, each one more empty and forgotten than the last. The house was small, but it had a weight. To it, a history that Mark could feel in the air. He continued deeper into the house, following the map his mother had given him. It led him to a door at the back of the house. The door was old, the wood worn and cracked. He reached for the handle and pushed it open, revealing a small staircase leading down into a dark basement. Mark hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He grabbed the flashlight from his bag and made his way down the stairs, Max close behind him. The basement was cold, the air thick with dust. Mark's flashlight flickered, casting shadows on the walls as he stepped further inside. There, in the corner of the basement, was an old chest. It was covered in dust, but it was unmistakable. The same chest his mother had told him about in the letter. The treasure, the key to everything. Mark approached the chest cautiously, his hands trembling as he knelt down. He wiped away the dust and ran his fingers over the worn wood. This was it, his inheritance. He opened the chest slowly, his breath catching in his throat. Inside, instead of gold or jewels, there were more documents. But these were different. These were family records, old and weathered. He picked up the top paper, his eyes scanning the faded ink. It was a will, dated back over 100 years. It was signed by his great-grandfather, a man he had never met. The will revealed something that Mark hadn't expected. His family had once owned the entire valley. Not just Larkstone Hill, but acres upon acres of land. And now it was all his. His inheritance wasn't just land. It was a legacy of power, of wealth, and of responsibility. Mark's heart raced as he absorbed the information. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. He stood up, holding the documents in his hands. He had come here searching for answers, but what he had found was so much more than that. This was the key to everything, to his future, to his family's past, and to the life he had always dreamed of. But with it came a burden, the weight of responsibility. The legacy of Larkstone Hill was now his to carry. Mark stood in the basement, the weight of the documents in his hands feeling heavier with each passing second. His eyes scanned the papers again, trying to process the enormity of what he had just uncovered. His great-grandfather's will, the land, the legacy, it was all a part of a history Mark hadn't even known existed. He had thought that reclaiming his life meant getting back to basics, starting over with nothing. But this was so much more. Larkstone Hill wasn't just an old family estate. It was a treasure trove, a forgotten empire waiting to be revived. He knew he had a responsibility now. This wasn't just about his own redemption anymore. It was about preserving something much bigger than him, something that had been passed down through generations. Mark stood up, clutching the papers to his chest, feeling the pulse of excitement and fear racing through him. The road ahead was unclear, and he was about to face a challenge bigger than anything he had ever known. He had to learn everything about this place, the land, the people who had owned it before, and the legacy that came with it. The map, the letters, and the documents all pointed to one thing. This was his path forward. But what would that path look like? He wasn't sure, but he was ready to find out. The next few days were a blur of research and meetings. Mark contacted historians, local experts, and lawyers, trying to piece together the full story of Larkstone Hill and his family's history. The more he learned, the more amazed he became at how much had been left behind. He learned about the land's rich history, the thriving farm that once sprawled across it, and the generations of his family that had worked it. But there were darker parts to the story as well. His great-grandfather had built a fortune, but with it had come enemies, rivals who had tried to take the land from his family. The estate had seen its share of bloodshed, with power struggles and betrayal lurking in the shadows. Mark's mind raced with the implications of what he had discovered. How much of that history was still buried here on Larkstone Hill? What had his great-grandfather hidden away, and why had it all been kept a secret for so long? He couldn't answer those questions yet, but he knew he had to find out. His mother had given him the key to this mystery, and now it was his turn to unlock the answers. One evening, as the sun began to set over the horizon, Mark stood outside the cottage, looking out over the valley. The golden light cast long shadows across the land, and for a moment, he felt a strange connection to it. This land, this legacy, it was his now. It felt surreal, as if everything that had happened in his life had led him to this moment. The loss, the pain, the battles, it had all been part of the journey that had brought him here. And now, it was time to face what came next. Max stood by his side, watching the landscape with the same intensity as Mark. The dog had been his constant companion throughout all of this, and Mark knew he couldn't have made it this far without him. Together, they had endured the hardships, and together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Mark turned away from the view and made his way back into the cottage. There was still so much to do. The property needed repairs, and the legacy he had inherited needed to be restored. But that wasn't the only thing on his mind. As he walked through the rooms of the cottage, he began to piece together a plan. He would restore the house, yes, but he would also uncover the secrets hidden within it. The letters, the maps, the chest. All of them were part of something much bigger. There was more to Larkstone Hill than he had initially realized, and he was determined to uncover every bit of it. The night fell quickly, and Mark sat at the old wooden desk in the corner of the room, spreading the papers out before him. The flickering candlelight cast shadows on the walls as he traced the names and dates, trying to make sense of the tangled history. He had come this far, but he knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles. The enemies of his family's past were long gone, but the mystery of what had been hidden here remained. What was it that his great-grandfather had protected so fiercely? What was buried beneath the surface of Larkstone Hill? Mark took a deep breath and looked at the map once more. It was clear that the next step in this journey would lead him even deeper into the history of the land. He would have to explore every corner of the property, every hidden room, every locked door. There was a treasure hidden here, and it wasn't just material wealth. It was the truth, the history, and the legacy of his family. Mark had always believed that his life was defined by his losses. But now, he understood that it wasn't the losses that defined him. It was the strength to face what came next. With Max by his side, Mark was ready to uncover the secrets of Larkstone Hill and reclaim the legacy that had been left to him. The journey was just beginning. Mark had spent the last few days searching the property, combing through every inch of Larkstone Hill. It felt like he was walking in the footsteps of his ancestors, uncovering their secrets, their history, and their mistakes. Each day, the hill seemed to whisper to him, as if it was alive with the memories of those who had come before him. Max stayed close, never straying far, as if the dog too could sense that they were on the verge of something important. The house was still a mystery, but Mark had begun to feel more at home there, as if this place had always been his. One evening, after a long day of exploring the land and sifting through more old documents, Mark returned to the house, tired but determined. He sat at the same wooden desk where he had uncovered the will and the family records, his mind racing with everything he had learned so far. But there was still one thing that kept nagging at him, the sealed door in the basement. He had avoided it for days, but the map and the documents all pointed back to it. It was time to face whatever lay behind it. Mark stood up from the desk, grabbing the key that had started it all. The old, rusted key his mother had left him. He had thought it was just a symbol of his inheritance, but now he realized it was the key to unlocking the truth. With Max by his side, Mark made his way down to the basement. The air was thick with anticipation, and the sound of his footsteps echoed in the stillness. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment. He had been here before, but now he felt ready. He inserted the key into the lock, and with a slow, deliberate turn, the door creaked open. Inside, the basement was even darker than he had remembered. The flashlight in his hand barely illuminated the space, but Mark could make out the outline of what looked like a hidden room at the far end. He walked forward, his breath shallow, as the sense of something important filled the air. Max growled softly, his ears pinned back, as if sensing that they were on the edge of something monumental. The room was small, filled with dust and cobwebs. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. But there, in the center of the room, was an old wooden chest. It was different from the others Mark had found. This one was made of solid oak, with intricate carvings along the sides. It looked ancient, as if it had been sitting here for centuries, waiting for someone to open it. Mark stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for the chest. He could feel the weight of it, the significance of the moment. With a deep breath, he lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there were more documents, but these were unlike anything he had seen before. They were covered in dust, but the edges were gold, and the paper was old and fragile. Mark carefully pulled them out, feeling the weight of history in his hands. As he unfolded the first document, he realized it was a map of the land, but there were markings on it that he had never seen before. The map didn't just show Larkstone Hill. It showed other properties, areas of land that had once been connected to his family's estate. This was bigger than he had thought. The secrets were much deeper, the connections more far-reaching. Mark continued to sift through the papers, and one by one, they revealed more about the family's past. There were legal documents, property deeds, letters from his great-grandfather to distant relatives, all detailing the land his family had once owned. The more he read, the more he understood. Larkstone Hill was not just a piece of land. It was the heart of something much larger. A legacy of wealth, power, and influence that had been lost over time. And now, Mark was the one to reclaim it. The final document caught his eye. It was a letter written in his great-grandfather's hand. As Mark read the words, he felt a chill run down his spine. The letter spoke of a secret hidden beneath the land, something that had been passed down through generations. Mark's heart pounded as he read further. The letter spoke of a treasure, but not the kind you would expect. This treasure was something far more valuable. It was a key to a fortune, a key to the family's legacy, a key to restoring everything that had been lost. Mark's pulse quickened as the realization hit him. He wasn't just reclaiming land. He was reclaiming his family's legacy, their future, and his own. The treasure wasn't gold or jewels. It was the power and knowledge that had been passed down through generations. The treasure was the land itself, the land that had been abandoned, forgotten, and lost for so long. But now it was his. Mark stood up, the chest still open before him, the documents in his hands heavy with the weight of his family's history. Max stood by his side, his eyes calm and steady. Mark knew this was only the beginning. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time, he felt ready. He had discovered the truth, and now, he would rebuild. The legacy of Larkstone Hill was his to restore, and he wasn't going to let it slip away again. Mark's heart was racing as he sat on the old wooden chair, surrounded by the papers that had changed his life. The letter from his great-grandfather still lay open in front of him, the words echoing in his mind. A treasure hidden beneath the land. A legacy to be reclaimed. It wasn't gold. It wasn't jewels. It was something far more valuable. The key to his family's future. Mark felt the weight of the responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. He had spent so many years feeling lost, adrift in the world, but now, it seemed, he had found his purpose. Larkstone Hill was his, and with it came the power to restore his family's legacy. He had to act quickly. The more he read through the documents, the more he realized how much he still didn't know. What exactly had been hidden here? Was there really a treasure, or was it just a metaphor for something else, something deeper? Mark stood up, running a hand through his hair. He needed answers. He couldn't do this alone. He thought back to the people who had helped him along the way, the ones who had supported him when he had nothing left. He needed to reach out to them. He grabbed his phone and made a few calls. Within a few hours, he had a meeting scheduled with an expert in local history, someone who could help him unlock the final pieces of the puzzle. The next morning, Mark drove to the town library, the map and documents from the chest tucked safely in his bag. Max sat in the passenger seat, his eyes alert as always. Mark had come to rely on his dog's instincts, and he wasn't sure he could have made it this far without him. As they pulled into the parking lot, Mark felt a sense of calm wash over him. The library had always been a place of knowledge, of discovery, and it felt like the right place to uncover the secrets of Larkstone Hill. Inside, he met with Dr. Emily Hayes, a local historian who had spent years researching the area's history. She was a tall woman with short-cropped hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She greeted Mark with a firm handshake and led him to a back room where they could spread out the documents and maps. As Mark explained the situation, Emily listened carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. She had heard of Larkstone Hill before, of course, but she had no idea it was tied to Mark's family. She was fascinated by the documents Mark had brought, especially the old map that showed not just the hill, but several other properties in the area. "This is more than just one piece of land," Emily said, her voice steady with excitement. "It's a network, a collection of properties that were once part of a much larger estate." Mark nodded. That's what he had suspected. The more he learned, the more it seemed like his family's legacy was bigger than he could have imagined. "Do you know anything about the treasure?" Mark asked, the words slipping out before he could stop himself. Emily smiled, but there was a hint of mystery in her eyes. "There have always been rumors of treasure hidden around here," she said, "but no one has ever found anything concrete. Some say it's buried beneath the old barn, others think it's hidden in the caves on the far side of the property. The truth is, no one really knows." Mark felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a lead. He needed to investigate these places, to see if there was any truth to the rumors. "I need your help," he said, looking her in the eye. "I need to find this treasure. If it's real, it could change everything." Emily hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I'll help you," she said. "But we need to be careful. There are people who would stop at nothing to get their hands on this land. We can't trust everyone." Mark understood. He had already learned that much. The land, the legacy, it was valuable, and there were always those who would try to take it from you. But he wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. Together, Mark and Emily began to go through the documents, piecing together clues and narrowing down potential locations. They identified a few places on the map that seemed to hold the most promise: a barn near the edge of the property, an old well that had been filled in years ago, and the caves on the far side of the hill. The more they dug, the more they uncovered. Each new discovery only fueled their determination to find the truth. As the days passed, Mark found himself growing more connected to the land, more determined to restore his family's legacy. It wasn't just about the treasure anymore. It was about the future, about giving Max a home, and about honoring his ancestors. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but Mark knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop until he had uncovered every secret that Larkstone Hill held. It was his legacy, and he was ready to claim it. Mark and Emily stood at the edge of the old barn, staring up at the structure that had once been the heart of the property. It had fallen into disrepair over the years, the roof sagging, and the walls cracked and weathered from time. Yet, despite its dilapidation, Mark felt a strange connection to it, as though it was waiting for him to uncover its secrets. Max, as always, stayed close by, his eyes scanning the area, alert to any movement. Mark had learned to trust the dog's instincts, and right now, Max was more focused than ever. "This is the place," Emily said, her voice calm but filled with the same sense of anticipation Mark felt. "The map points here, and the legends say there's something hidden underneath." Mark nodded, taking a deep breath. He had already uncovered so much, but this felt different. They had been following a trail of clues for days, digging through the records and the maps his great-grandfather had left behind. But this barn, this seemingly insignificant structure, was where it all seemed to lead. Emily stepped forward, her hand brushing the side of the barn as she examined the foundation. "The barn's been here for generations," she said. "It's where they kept the animals, the tools, everything. But I have a feeling that it's also where your family hid something valuable." Mark's heart raced at the thought. This barn could be the key to everything. He had learned that his family had once been powerful, and it seemed they had hidden away their wealth and legacy in the most unexpected of places. Mark crouched down, inspecting the ground beneath the barn. He could feel the weight of the earth, the history buried beneath it. He ran his fingers over the cracked wood, looking for anything that could be a sign. Emily joined him, and together, they began to lift the rotting floorboards, revealing a small, dark opening underneath. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of old wood and earth filled Mark's nose. He could barely make out the shape of something metal hidden in the shadows. He reached into the hole and pulled out an old iron chest. It was heavy, covered in rust and dirt, but Mark could see the intricate engravings on its surface, signs that it was no ordinary chest. He wiped away the dust, revealing a lock that had long since lost its shine. Emily's eyes widened as she leaned in closer. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what we've been searching for." Mark's hands trembled as he examined the lock. The key his mother had given him still hung from his neck, a constant reminder of the promise he had made to uncover the truth. He inserted the key into the lock, and with a turn, the chest opened. Inside, there were stacks of documents, old and yellowed with age. Mark lifted the top paper, his heart pounding as he read the words. It was a deed, but not just any deed. It was the deed to the land that had been part of his family's fortune. But that wasn't all. Beneath the deed were more papers, each one revealing a layer of Mark's family's hidden wealth. There were blueprints for buildings, plans for a massive estate, and records of investments that spanned decades. Mark couldn't believe what he was seeing. His family had been far more than just landowners. They had been investors, businessmen, and women of influence who had quietly built an empire over the years. This chest wasn't just holding documents. It was holding the legacy of a family that had been forgotten, erased from history. Mark took a deep breath, trying to process everything he had just discovered. His family's wealth, their influence, had been hidden away in this barn for generations. But why? Why had they chosen to keep it a secret? Mark glanced over at Emily, who was just as stunned as he was. "We need to get these to the lawyer," she said, her voice quiet. "This is bigger than we thought." Mark nodded, still in disbelief. The chest, the treasure, it was all real. He had always believed that Larkstone Hill was a place of lost opportunities, a place that had taken everything from him. But now, it seemed, it was the key to everything he had ever wanted. It was a new beginning. They carefully packed up the documents, making sure to preserve them as they headed back to the cottage. Mark's mind raced as he thought about what this discovery meant for his future. The land, the wealth, it was all within his grasp. But there was still so much to uncover. Who had tried to erase his family's history? And who else knew about the treasure hidden beneath the barn? As Mark drove back to the cottage, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. Max barked, his eyes locked on something in the distance. Mark slammed on the brakes, his heart skipping a beat. In the distance, he saw a figure standing in the shadows, watching them. Mark's blood ran cold. Who was this person, and why were they here? He glanced over at Emily, who was already reaching for the door. "Stay in the car," she said quietly. "I'll handle this." Mark didn't want to let her go alone, but he knew she had more experience with this kind of situation than he did. She stepped out of the car, her movements cautious but confident. Mark watched her approach the figure, the tension in the air thick with uncertainty. He didn't know what was about to happen, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Mark watched intently as Emily approached the figure in the distance, his mind racing. His grip on the steering wheel tightened, and Max, sensing his tension, let out a low growl from the back seat. The figure was tall and cloaked in shadow, their posture rigid, unmoving. Emily's steps were deliberate but cautious, and she didn't break her gaze from the figure. Mark couldn't make out much about the stranger, but a feeling deep in his gut told him this wasn't a coincidence. As Emily drew nearer, the figure finally spoke. "I've been waiting for you." The voice was deep, rough, but strangely calm. It sent a chill through Mark, who instinctively reached for the door handle, ready to step out if necessary. Emily stopped a few feet away from the stranger, her body language measured, the experience of dealing with such encounters evident in her calm demeanor. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice steady but with an edge of authority. The stranger let out a slow breath, his face still concealed in the shadows. "My name's Thomas. I've been looking for the rightful heir to Larkstone Hill." The words hit Mark like a jolt of electricity. He hadn't expected anyone else to know about the land or the secrets it held. He watched as Emily sized up Thomas, her eyes narrowing slightly as she processed his words. "You've been looking for me," Mark heard Emily repeat, though it wasn't a question. She wasn't asking for clarification. She was trying to understand the motives behind the man's statement. Thomas nodded, his silhouette moving slightly as if he was preparing to explain. "Your great-grandfather left more than just land," Thomas continued, his voice now more deliberate. "There's more to Larkstone Hill than you've uncovered so far." Mark's heart skipped a beat. What did he mean by more? Hadn't he uncovered all the secrets? He gripped the door handle more tightly, but Emily held up a hand, signaling him to stay put. She knew this situation required more tact than immediate confrontation. "What do you know about my great-grandfather's will?" Emily asked, her voice now cool, almost disinterested. Thomas's eyes flicked toward Mark for the first time, the shadows casting an eerie look over his features. "I know more than you might think. Your family was not just wealthy. They were part of something larger, something much more powerful, something hidden away for safekeeping." Emily's expression remained neutral, but Mark could tell she was weighing his words carefully. He leaned back in his seat, his mind whirling. What could be so powerful that his family had gone to such lengths to hide it? What was hidden beneath the land of Larkstone Hill? "What do you want?" Emily's question cut through the tension like a knife. Thomas took a step forward, closer to Emily, and Mark could now see the glint of something metallic at his side. Perhaps a weapon, perhaps something more symbolic. "I want what's mine," Thomas said quietly. "And I believe the heir to Larkstone Hill is the one who can finally unlock it." Emily raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You've been following me," she said. "What's your game here?" Thomas's demeanor shifted slightly, and for the first time, there was a hint of frustration in his voice. "The land. The legacy. It's mine. I have the documents to prove it." Mark could feel the weight of his words sink in. Who else was out there claiming ownership of Larkstone Hill? He had already begun to feel the pull of the legacy, but now, there were others who seemed determined to take it from him. Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small folder, handing it to Emily. She took it without hesitation, flipping it open. Mark couldn't see the contents, but the expression on Emily's face told him everything he needed to know. This man had evidence, and it was real. "You need to understand, this isn't just about land," Thomas continued, his voice now softened, almost pleading. "This is about what your great-grandfather did to keep everything safe, hidden from the wrong people. And now, the wrong people are after it." Mark stepped out of the car, moving closer to Emily. And the stranger. He could feel his pulse quicken as the realization set in. This wasn't just about Larkstone Hill anymore. This was about the forces that had controlled it, the secrets it held, and the lengths they would go to keep it all buried. Emily handed the folder to Mark, her face unreadable. He opened it slowly, scanning the documents inside. They were official, stamped with seals, and dated far back into his family's past. It was clear now that Thomas wasn't lying. There were others who had a claim to the land. But who were they, and why had they waited so long to make their move? Mark's mind raced. The tension in the air was palpable as Thomas watched him closely, as if waiting for a reaction. "So what happens now?" Mark asked, his voice firm, more confident than he felt. Thomas's lips curled into a small, almost unreadable smile. "Now, you find out exactly what your great-grandfather left behind, and you decide what you're going to do with it." Emily stepped forward, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder, her expression serious. "We'll find out exactly who's behind this," she said. "But we need to be careful. There are people in the shadows, and they'll stop at nothing to get their hands on Larkstone Hill." Mark nodded. He understood now. This wasn't just a battle for land. It was a battle for his family's legacy, and it was a battle he wasn't going to lose. Mark felt the weight of the folder in his hands as he sat in the dimly lit study, the old fireplace crackling softly in the background. Emily had left to gather more information, her mind clearly racing with the new developments. Thomas had slipped into the shadows, a mysterious figure whose claim to the land seemed to be as old and tangled as the history of Larkstone Hill itself. Mark's thoughts were still spinning, trying to make sense of everything he had just learned. This wasn't just about a piece of land anymore. It wasn't even just about the treasure his great-grandfather had hidden beneath the hill. This was a battle over something much larger, a battle for control over a legacy that had been buried for decades, and possibly longer. The papers in front of him held the key to everything. They were a mix of legal documents, maps, and deeds. Some were older than others, yellowed with age, others still crisp, as if they had only been signed yesterday. He scanned through them again, looking for something that would tell him exactly what had been hidden and why it was so important. His great-grandfather had been a careful man, a man who knew the value of secrecy and protection. But as Mark looked over the pages, he began to realize that his great-grandfather wasn't just hiding treasure. He was hiding power. The documents detailed not just land, but entire networks of influence. There were references to hidden agreements, covert meetings, and dealings with people whose names Mark had never heard of. But one name stood out among the rest, a name that seemed to appear repeatedly. The name was Charles Redford. Mark ran his fingers over the name, the letters almost jumping out at him. Redford, the same surname as Thomas. His mind clicked into place. Thomas was part of the Redford family, but why had he waited until now to come forward? Was this all just a claim to the land, or was there something deeper at play? Mark leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He needed to know more about Charles Redford, about the Redford family, and about their connection to Larkstone Hill. It was clear that Thomas had some knowledge of the family's secrets, and if Mark was going to protect what was rightfully his, he had to learn everything he could. The next day, Mark made his way into town, feeling the weight of his decision heavy on his shoulders. He had already spoken to a few locals about the Redfords, but he needed more. He needed the truth. The town library was small, but well-stocked with historical records. Mark had spent hours there in the past, but today, it felt different. This time, he wasn't just searching for family history. He was searching for answers that could change everything. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by the familiar scent of old paper and dust. The librarian, a kind older woman named Mrs. Whitaker, looked up from her desk and smiled. "Back again, Mark?" she asked, her voice warm and welcoming. "Yes," Mark replied. "But today, I need to look into something specific. The Redford family. Do you have any records on them?" Mrs. Whitaker raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "The Redfords? That's quite a name around here. But it's been years since anyone's really spoken about them. Their connection to the land is a story that's been buried for decades." Mark nodded, his interest piqued. "I need to know everything. Whatever you have, I need to see it." She hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to share what she knew. Then, with a quiet sigh, she stood up and walked over to a shelf in the back of the room. She pulled down a thick, leather-bound book and placed it in front of Mark. "This is the Redford family history," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of reverence and regret. "It's all here, the rise of their power, their ties to the land, and everything that happened afterward. But be warned, Mark. Some of the things in there are better left untouched." Mark's heart raced as he opened the book. The pages were filled with handwritten notes and faded photographs, some of them barely legible. He carefully flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the words. What he found was both fascinating and disturbing. The Redfords were once one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the region. They had amassed a fortune through business dealings, but there was more to their success than just hard work. The family had deep ties to local politicians, businessmen, and even law enforcement. But there were rumors of secret deals, under-the-table payments, and a legacy that had been built on corruption and deception. Mark's stomach churned as he read through the pages. His great-grandfather had been part of this world, a world of hidden power and influence. But something had happened. There was a turning point, a moment when the Redford family's power began to fade. Mark could see the change in the records, documents that had been crossed out, names that had been erased, entire sections of the family's history that had been deliberately hidden. It all pointed to one thing. The Redfords had lost something important, and his great-grandfather had been the one to protect it. But why had he kept it secret? Mark's thoughts were interrupted when Mrs. Whitaker spoke again. "You've seen it now," she said softly. "But be careful, Mark. The Redfords aren't just a family. They're a legacy, and legacies have a way of coming back, no matter how deeply they're buried." Mark closed the book slowly, his mind reeling. He had learned more than he had expected, but he still didn't have all the answers. As he left the library, he felt the weight of his family's history bearing down on him. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about the legacy that had been hidden for so long. And now, it was up to him to decide what to do with it. Mark walked back to the cottage, his mind filled with the weight of everything he had just uncovered. The Redford family, the lost legacy, his great-grandfather's secret life, it was all coming together in a way that both fascinated and terrified him. The deeper he dug, the more questions arose. What had his great-grandfather been protecting all these years? And why had he hidden everything from Mark? As Mark entered the cottage, Max followed closely behind, his loyal eyes never leaving his owner. Mark sat down at the old wooden table, the flickering candlelight casting shadows across the room. He spread out the documents Mrs. Whitaker had given him on the table and stared at the names, the dates, and the strange symbols in the margins of the pages. The Redfords had been more than just a powerful family. They had been part of a network, a hidden society with deep ties to the land, and perhaps even to things far beyond the ordinary. Mark's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. He stood up quickly, his heart racing. He hadn't expected anyone else. As he opened the door, he was greeted by the familiar face of Emily. Her expression was tense, and her eyes were filled with a sense of urgency. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "About what?" Mark asked, his mind still racing from the discoveries he had made. Emily didn't waste any time. "I've been doing some digging of my own. The Redfords, there's more to them than we thought. I found some connections between them and a local politician. Someone who may have been using their influence for more than just land deals." Mark felt a chill run down his spine. "Who?" "Senator Philip Dawson," Emily replied, her voice low. "I think he might be the one behind the efforts to claim Larkstone Hill. The land was always valuable, but it seems like Dawson was after something much bigger." Mark's head spun as he tried to make sense of what Emily was saying. A politician? Why would Dawson be interested in Larkstone Hill? What was the connection between the Redfords, the land, and Dawson's ambitions? "What do we do now?" Mark asked, his voice tinged with worry. Emily's eyes narrowed. "We need to find out exactly what Dawson is up to, and we need to do it quickly. If he's involved, then we might be facing more than just a legal battle." Mark nodded, the gravity of the situation settling over him. He had come to Larkstone Hill to reclaim his family's legacy, but now, it seemed, he was on the edge of something much bigger, something that could shake the foundations of everything he thought he knew. Emily turned toward the door, signaling to Mark to follow. "Come on. We're going to visit someone who might have the answers." Mark followed her outside, the cool night air biting at his skin. They walked together toward Emily's truck, the only sound the crunch of gravel underfoot. As they drove through the winding roads, Mark's mind raced. Senator Dawson, the Redfords, the treasure hidden beneath Larkstone Hill. What had his great-grandfather been involved in? And why had it all been kept so secret? The truck rumbled to a stop in front of a small, weathered house on the outskirts of town. "This is where Dawson's former associate lives," Emily said as she parked the truck. "He might know more about what happened, about why Dawson is so interested in the land." Mark nodded, his pulse quickening as he followed Emily up the path to the house. The windows were dark, and the door creaked as they knocked. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing an older man with graying hair and a wary expression. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice thick with caution. Emily introduced herself, and Mark followed suit. "We're looking for information about Senator Dawson," Emily said, her voice steady. "We've been investigating the Redford family and their connection to Larkstone Hill. We think Dawson might be involved." The man's face went pale at the mention of Dawson's name. "Dawson," he muttered, his voice low. "I haven't heard that name in years. But if you're looking for answers, you won't find them here. Dawson's not the kind of man who lets his secrets slip easily." Mark leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Do you know anything about the Redfords and Dawson's connection to the land?" The man hesitated for a long moment, glancing over his shoulder as if making sure no one was listening. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he spoke. "The Redfords were part of a much bigger plan. They were involved in something dangerous. And Dawson, well, he had his hands in it all. But it wasn't just about the land. It was about what the land contained. There were rumors of hidden assets, things that could change the balance of power around here." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Hidden assets? What was this man talking about? "What do you mean by assets?" Mark asked, his voice barely a whisper. The man looked around nervously before speaking again. "I don't know the full details. But what I do know is this. Dawson is after more than just land. He wants the legacy of the Redfords, everything they built, everything they hid. And he's willing to do anything to get it." Mark felt a knot form in his stomach. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but there was still so much he didn't understand. "What can we do?" Emily asked, her voice sharp with urgency. The man looked at her for a moment before answering. You need to find out what Dawson's really after. And you need to do it before he does. The man stepped back, his face tense. But be careful. Dawson has eyes everywhere. Mark and Emily exchanged a look. The stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. This wasn't just about reclaiming the land. It was about protecting something far more valuable. And they were running out of time. The days that followed were a blur of tension and urgency. Mark and Emily worked tirelessly to uncover every lead, every connection. They knew time was running out, and Dawson's reach was growing stronger with every passing hour. The documents they had found were starting to make sense, but there were still so many unanswered questions. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous the situation became. Emily had set up meetings with local allies, people who might know more about Dawson's secret ambitions, while Mark focused on the land, tracing the history of Larkstone Hill and the Redford's ties to it. It became clear that Dawson wasn't just interested in the land for its inherent value. There was something hidden beneath the soil that could change everything, something his great-grandfather had spent years protecting. The hidden assets were more than just financial. They were part of a legacy that, if uncovered, would grant immense power to whoever controlled it. Mark knew he couldn't let Dawson take control of it. As he walked through the overgrown paths of Larkstone Hill one late afternoon, his thoughts weighed heavily on him. The hill seemed to stretch endlessly before him, a place full of forgotten history and buried secrets. Max trotted by his side, always alert, his paws crunching softly on the gravel as they made their way through the land. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the ground. The warm golden light made the place feel almost magical, like something ancient was waiting to be discovered. Mark stopped at the old stone well near the edge of the property. It had always been there, tucked away in a quiet corner, but he hadn't paid it much attention until now. His great-grandfather's letters had mentioned the well in passing, but it had seemed like a relic, a forgotten piece of the past. Now, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the well might hold the key to everything. He knelt down beside it, peering into the darkness below. Max stood by, his ears pricked, his body tense. Mark could almost hear the wind whispering through the trees, urging him to look deeper. He reached for a rusty old bucket tied to the well's rope, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he lowered it into the darkness. The rope creaked under the weight, but the bucket descended quietly, as if the well was holding its breath. After what felt like an eternity, Mark pulled the bucket back up. As it emerged from the darkness, Mark could see something shiny inside. His heart skipped a beat. The bucket held a small metal box, old and weathered, covered in dirt and moss. Mark's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, nestled carefully in the box, was a key, an ornate key that glimmered in the fading light. It was the same design as the key his great-grandfather had given him. Mark's breath caught in his throat. This was it. The key to the final piece of the puzzle. He stood up, holding the key tightly in his hand. The wind seemed to pick up, rustling the leaves of the trees around him. Max growled softly, sensing something in the air. Mark's thoughts raced as he hurried back to the cottage, the key clutched tightly in his fist. He had to find out where it fit. He had to uncover the final secret. When he arrived at the cottage, Emily was waiting for him, her face tired but determined. She had gathered more information, but there was still so much they didn't know. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice steady. Mark held up the key, his fingers still trembling. "This," he said, his voice quiet. "This is the key to everything." Emily looked at it for a moment before nodding. "Where do you think it leads?" Mark shook his head. "I don't know yet, but I think we're about to find out." They spent the next few hours retracing their steps, revisiting the places that had seemed important, but nothing felt right. The key didn't fit in any of the obvious places. As the night wore on, Mark felt a growing sense of frustration. It wasn't until he returned to the basement of the cottage, where he had first uncovered the chest, that it hit him. The key. It had to fit in the locked drawer that had been left unopened. The drawer had been part of the chest, and the lock on it had always seemed different from the others. He ran down the stairs, Emily right behind him. Max followed, his tail low, as if he too could sense the importance of this moment. Mark approached the chest and carefully inserted the key into the lock. There was a soft click, and the drawer slid open. Inside, there were more documents, but these were different. These were handwritten letters, and they were signed with a name Mark hadn't expected to see: Charles Redford. His mind raced as he read through the letters. They spoke of a secret agreement, one that had been made between his great-grandfather and Charles Redford. The documents outlined the true purpose of Larkstone Hill. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was the heart of a vast, hidden network, a network of influence, power, and wealth that had been kept hidden for generations. Mark's eyes widened as he read further. The letters detailed a plan for a future that his great-grandfather had set into motion, a plan that had been carefully concealed. And now, that plan was in his hands. The letters ended with a simple sentence: the legacy must be protected, no matter the cost. Mark stood there, stunned. The legacy was real, but so were the dangers that came with it. Dawson, the Redfords, they were all part of something much bigger than he had imagined. But now he was ready. He wasn't just going to let the legacy be taken. He would protect it, no matter the cost. The battle wasn't over, but it was just beginning. In this captivating tale of discovery, resilience, and family legacy, Mark embarks on a journey to reclaim his family's long-lost inheritance. What starts as a quest to uncover hidden treasures beneath Larkstone Hill soon reveals much more: an intricate web of history, power, and secrets that have been buried for generations. As Mark uncovers documents and key pieces of his family's past, he finds himself caught in a battle over something far more valuable than land. This is not just one of those ordinary veteran stories you may have heard before. It's a story of a man reclaiming his rightful place in a legacy that spans decades. From uncovering hidden chambers to battling mysterious forces, this veteran's journey takes unexpected twists that will leave you on the edge of your seat. As the tension builds, the focus shifts from mere survival to the restoration of a heritage that was nearly lost. In the world of veteran stories, this tale stands out as a testament to the power of perseverance and the importance of discovering the truth hidden in plain sight. Mark's story, filled with history and intrigue, brings an emotional depth that resonates with anyone who has ever fought for what they believe is theirs. Join us as we follow Mark's journey to protect his family's legacy from those who would stop at nothing to seize it. With every twist and turn, Mark's story proves that sometimes the greatest battles are fought for something much deeper than wealth. Don't miss out on this unforgettable chapter of veteran stories. It's a journey worth taking, filled with courage, mystery, and a legacy that refuses to be forgotten.